Well, the first point about austerity is we've got to realise why we're in this mess, why we have a deficit of the degree that we actually have. And that's not because of overspending. In fact, the Tories backed Labour spending plans pound for pound till the end of 2008. The reason, above all else, was because in the aftermath of a financial collapse, our tax revenues sharply declined, the automatic stabilisers kicked in, we spent more on social security as people lost their jobs, for example. So that's the reason why we have such a large deficit at the moment. Austerity has failed even on its own terms because over the last year the underlying deficit's gone up. The government's borrowing £245 billion more than they projected over the course of this Parliament. The idea of getting rid of the deficit altogether by 2015 is obviously laughably dead, and indeed austerity is set to continue till 2020, and that's because austerity is self-defeating. It sucks demand out of the economy. It stops people stop spending money because they're scared of losing their jobs, and their real disposable income goes down, and as a result tax revenues go down. So instead what we need is to actually get demand in the economy again, particularly in a consumer-dominated economy such as ourselves, where the service sector in particular is so large. And other examples of actually how we can bring down spending without actually cutting are, instead of, for example, subsidising landlords with housing benefit, we should let councils build homes. Instead of subsidising low pay through tax credits, we should have a living wage. Instead of spending billions of pounds on unemployment, we should have an industrial strategy to get people into proper, secure work. So the alternative to austerity is about, yes, actually stop spending money on things like subsidising low pay and a housing crisis, but it's also about getting demand going and getting demand in the economy again and actually having growth. And if you have growth on those things, then the deficit will automatically decline as you rebuild your tax base. Well, at the moment there's a cap on council borrowing, which means they can't borrow in order to build housing. Now, what Boris Johnson, of all people, has suggested, and others have suggested, is that you remove that cap, and what we do then is we move our accountancy rules in line with Western Europe, so that debt, that borrowing, isn't included in our public sector, our national public sector borrowing sheet, because that's obviously the fear people have. That's just adding more to the national debt that we've got. It shouldn't do, and other Western European countries don't include that sort of debt in the national public borrowing figures. In years, obviously, it also pays for itself because you get a secure stream of rent coming in, but also, crucially, it creates jobs and stimulates the economy. House building has a multiplier effect throughout the economy. So it will also get people into work, which will again bring down social security spending, also help get demand in the economy because people will be spending money. So that, I think, is because everyone accepts there's a housing crisis that needs to be dealt with, and that should be at the heart of giving the economy a desperately needed kick to get it back to life again, and allowing councils to borrow, moving in line with Western European countries which do the same, I think is one very positive step in that direction. Well, the point about this welfare cap is actually a bit of a gimmick. All it means in practice is if spending goes above a certain amount, then a public warning is issued to the government. So it's not as though suddenly the money hits the buffers and therefore instant automatic cutbacks take place. It is trying to, above all else, it's trying to play to the prejudices people have about social security and what it's spent on. And indeed, there was a poll which just came out, which was published today, which showed how people drastically overestimate, for example, fraud in social security. People estimated it as about 23% when it's 0.7% according to the government's own figures. So in practical terms, firstly, it's to play to that idea that basically your hard-working people are subsidising a bunch of good-for-nothing scroungers, which is why we're going to crack down on that spending. Most social security goes to elderly people who've paid in all their life. Most working age benefits go to people in work through, for example, tax credits, which, as I say, subsidise low pay, through housing benefit, which is increasingly an in-work benefit, as well as child benefit and so on. And then you get people spending on disabled people, which as a civilised society I'd hope we'd accept. And then a very small proportion goes on unemployed people. And the vast majority of those are people desperate for work. We have 6.5 million people looking for full-time work in this country. A few weeks ago, there was a vacancy for one job in Hull, a secretarial position, and over 650 people applied for that job. There's a desperation for work that exists. So instead of having these gimmicks which talk about this idea, basic playing to the idea social security spending is out of control because of these feckless scroungers, let's get to the root of why social security spending has gone up. And that means tackling low pay, a lack of secure jobs, and also the housing crisis. If we tackle those issues, then spending will come down and we won't need to play about with gimmicks like caps. No, I mean, well, firstly, the proposed Royal Mail privatisation is just yet another disastrous privatisation in the making. Workers at Royal Mail have been polled by their own union, the Communication Workers Union, and overwhelmingly rejected the government's proposals. We've already seen the disaster of privatisation on the railways, where we ended up spending 4 times more. We have a situation where the majority of the British people want to bring back into public ownership not just the railways, but also, for example, energy companies. In practical terms, privatisation will inevitably lead not to a worker-owned company. It will probably just end up the same as all the other privatised businesses. Generally, large foreign multinationals will come in and take them over. Ironically enough, foreign nationalised companies, because our energy and our railways partly have got foreign nationalised companies like French companies who've come in and taken charge. The way we should be reforming public services is not by privatisation, which threatens, again, this service because, for example, there's lots of loss-making elements to a public service like mail, rural services, for example. They're a huge burden. But I think, as a society would accept, obviously you've got to have a universal service across the country, even if that isn't profitable, because obviously as a civilised society, everybody should be able to send and receive post. So those sorts of things would be threatened. We've already, because of liberalisation of mail, private companies cherry-pick the most profitable elements and leave the state saddled with the least profitable elements. But instead, what we should be arguing with these sorts of services is, yes, worker involvement, but that's by having democratically elected workers, representatives on the management board of companies. That's something I'd like to see, for example, if we take British Rail back into public ownership, like the majority of the British people would like to happen. That doesn't mean a return to the top-down statist form of nationalisation we had before. It could mean passengers having elected representatives, along with workers' representatives, on those boards to make sure that the railways actually run in the interests of those who use them. And the same should apply to things like Royal Mail. Let's give a bit of democracy there, not end up selling them off to large multinational companies who, at the end of the day, want to make a quick buck and don't have the interests of the British public at heart.